So joining me today is Sherry, also known as Link's Little Triforce, to talk about collecting Zelda. I'm super excited to talk with her because she has an insane Zelda collection, and
Pretty
every time I
much.
go to her website or see her Instagram, there is something I had no idea existed. And as someone who loves Zelda and has only recently gotten more into collecting things outside of the games, I thought it'd be great to chat with her so that we can all learn something new about Zelda collecting. So thank you again, Sherry, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me here.
And the first thing I wanted to ask you is what sparked your initial interest in The Legend of Zelda?
So I'm old. I am old enough to remember when the games came out originally and
Mhm.
NES era originally. Um, as a kid, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. But I always had cousins who always had like the latest and greatest systems. And so when they were on the Super Nintendo, I was on the Nintendo. And when they were on the
Mhm.
64, I had graduated up to the Super Nintendo. And as like a 3-year old, I would be playing like the original Legend of Zelda and the original Zelda 2 and not knowing what's going on. And I did my best as like a small little gamer.
Mhm.
Um, but it really clicked when Ocarina of Time came out and my cousins had it on their 64. And I just remember Navi flying through the forest to go wake up Link for the first time. And like as a child, even thinking about it kind of like tears me up. Like it was just
Wow.
such a beautiful gaming moment. And that's when I think I was probably like 8 or 9 maybe at that time when that game came out.
Mhm.
Maybe a little older, maybe around 10. And I just remember thinking that that was such a beautiful game. And at the time, I owned Link to the Past and the two NES titles. So when my cousins were playing out at a time, I went back and I was determined to beat the older games. And that's when I really kind of got into the series. Like it was always something that I loved when I was little,
Mhm.
but it really didn't become an unhealthy obsession until I was about 10 and Ocarina of Time came out.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's to be 3 years old and even attempting the NES Zelda games is
Oh, I did
pretty
not do
impressive.
well. I did not do well.
Still,
I probably got the sword and that was about it. And I would just
yeah.
walk around and die.
Yeah, I can imagine those NES games are pretty brutal. And yeah, I remember even because I was probably like 5 or 6 when A Link to the Past came out, and
Okay.
I saw that. So yeah, I'm old too, on
It's
the
not
older
just me.
side. And the first thing that really caught me was I was watching him play because I was like too intimidated. I really knew like platformers. That's all I like could do it when I was younger. So, but watching him in like that Hyrule Castle music from A Link to the
Mm.
Past was what hooked me. I was like, I was like, oh, Zelda has the coolest music I've ever heard in a video game. And yeah, those. But yeah, I'm always interested to hear that moment for people, like what really kind of drew them in. So with we knew you were hooked with Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past, but when it came to the actual collecting aspect, when did that kind of kick in for you? When did you get interested in acquiring, whether it's the games, just trying to collect all the games and all these stuff outside of the games?
So it really started with the video games themselves.
Mhm.
Again, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, so we didn't get the games in when they were brand new. A lot of them were
Mhm.
hand me downs. But I was fortunate that a lot of them did come with the boxes, the manuals, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I also have two younger brothers, and my brothers were the kind of kids that they literally took a lot of my old NES game boxes and they would throw them into my dad's fish tank because they were
Oh,
boats.
that
So
hurts to hear today.
well,
Yeah.
so that like most of my stuff, so like the Mario boxes, Kirby boxes, like things that would have had money today. A lot of those ended up in the fish tank, unfortunately, and got thrown out. But because my brothers were my brothers, I was that kid that, as like a 10-year-old, I cut a hole in my mattress and I stuffed all of my boxes and manuals for Zelda stuff. So like I
Mm.
still have my childhood Game Boy box, my childhood Zelda 1 box, things like that. I stuffed all that in my mattress because I didn't
Wow.
want them to get ruined. And that was my way of preserving them and keeping them safe. And then as I got into high school, that's when merchandise became more widely available. There was stuff that came out in the late 90s, but a lot of that was like mail away stuff. You didn't really see that in basic stores in the area, at least for me. So when I was in high school, that's when like strategy guides really started popping up in the EB Games at the time, the ye old GameStop. And collecting the strategy guides was my first kind of foray, like after collecting the games themselves. And then that's when I started having a disposable income, and that's when eBay was becoming a thing. And then I was finding, vintage figures and actually importing stuff. So I would say, honestly, when my partner and I first moved into our apartment, that's when I really started spending too much money and having
something every collector says.
Yeah. We actually had like a tower that like we basically pulled out of the trash. It was like a big it almost looked like a castle tower, and I painted it to be stone textured, and it had glass panels all the way around, and that was like my first like collectible like showcase. And that was when we first moved into our apartment, which would have been 2011, I think, is when I had a little bit more disposable income outside of like this selection of like strategy guides and the video games I had growing up. I remember buying like my first Zelda t-shirt at Hot Topic, things like that. And then just kept buying more, and here we are.
Yeah, so you were definitely pretty ahead of the curve, I would say, in terms of like getting in on collecting with like the complete inbox games and things like that. And the fact, I mean, you, even as a child, as you said, you wanted to save the boxes and stuff, where a lot of us,
it was that weirdo.
Yeah, we just threw the box, didn't care, and now like it's so desirable. Because I mean, I walked into a comic shop, I want to say 2010 or 2011, and I saw A Link to the Past complete inbox for $20, and I still kept my childhood Super Nintendo, and I bought that. And even then, like, I did know, like, now grown up, I was like, oh, it's awesome to have the box, because you just never see that. And I had no idea it was going to become like how much complete inbox games would blow up, especially obviously the ones with cardboard. How
especially
much that
over the last couple of years too. I actually work in a video game store, like a mom and pop kind of store, and the game prices are astronomical. They are insane in the last couple of years, with like the collector market going crazy, and like the whole grading market going crazy. My partner wanted a copy of Minish Cap for Christmas, right around like shutdown, and I was like, yeah, no problem. Like, I'll buy you one. Like, not that I don't already own a couple copies, but he wanted to have his own, so that way he wouldn't like sully the collection, right?
Yeah.
And then at the time, I was like, yeah, like at worst, it's going to be what, $70-$80 for like a complete box one? Sure, whatever. And I go online, and at the time, it was $140 on the low end for a complete one. And that was then. Like, last I looked, it was over the $250 mark. Like, it's just bonkers to me how expensive that stuff got.
Yeah. And that was one of the things I wanted to ask you was, I mean, someone who was way ahead of things in terms of collecting Zelda, how did 2020 impact your collecting? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you were happy to see that the value of your collection went way up, but as far as acquiring new things, that must have been very frustrating, I can imagine.
No.
Unless you had already just completed the video game at that point.
So I am also that person. I own, I think, 12 different variants of Ocarina of Time at this point. So I'm never quite done. There's always a European version, or there's always a Japanese version, or there's label variants. Like, I have so many games that it's like the slightest like marking on the sticker that's different, because they did an oval Nintendo logo instead of a circle Nintendo logo. Like, I own too many copies. So that never really ends for me. But I'm not the kind of collector that cares about the monetary value. Like, my wallet does, and my finances and taking care of adulting things cares. But I'm not that person. I'm not like, oh, look how expensive this thing is. very much look at things from a historical context more.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I'm just excited to finally get the thing I was looking for and to preserve it and to take photos of it and to share it and to research it. Because that's one thing, like you said, you've come to my website because you were trying to look up stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me happy. That makes me so happy that I could be of use to other Zelda collectors who, aren't as insane as I am, and you're not literally going through legalese documents to look up lawsuits about a Zelda pencil that you have in your collection, because that's something that I do. I spent 2 weeks looking through legal court documents over craziness over a pencil. So I like providing those stories and those histories for people and having that context. Like, this isn't just, a magazine. This isn't just a game. Like, there's this whole crazy wildness behind it. So that's where I go for. As far as collecting, 2020 was actually really bad for me, not because things were expensive, but because the import market said go ahead. So to explain, I actually did a big unboxing video in 2021 where for the course of a year and a half, I was importing stuff through buy.jp. And normally when you're importing stuff, the third-party company that is basically like your go-between between Japanese sellers and you, they'll only hold your stuff for like a month. And if you don't claim it and have it shipped to you within that month period, they basically have the rights to like reclaim it and resell it, kind of thing. And it's kind of where they kind of make their money from. And so that's something that I have been used to for years and years with collecting. And during shutdown, they would not ship internationally for obvious reasons, because they didn't know how the virus could spread, things like that. And so they're like, hey, we want you to still shop, because we still want like the money as far as like being kind of your liaison. But here's what we're going to do. We're just going to waive that whole month like hold period. We'll just hold your stuff indefinitely until we can ship internationally again. So go nuts. And I was like, okay, let's go. Because one thing you want to do if you choose to import, is getting as much stuff in a single package as possible. A very small item might still cost you $35 to ship, versus, a box full of a bunch of small things. And when you consolidate that, even after consolidation fees, you might be paying $65 for like 20 little items versus like $20-$30 for one item, just in shipping fees alone. So over the course of a year and a half between 2020 and 2021, after consolidation fees, I think I still spent over $1,000, maybe $1,500 just in shipping, because I went ham and I imported a couple hundred items, and it was great. My wallet didn't like it, but I was excited because I just got a bunch of stuff, and then I got really addicted to importing again. So like I said, I have a wall of things that I mentioned earlier before we started recording about how I need to do another big unboxing, because it's killing me that it's sitting over there and I haven't played with it yet.
Yeah.
But I've spent so much money, and I have to like put my like import like login away, like change my password, don't let me have it, because I will go shopping again. And it's fun to get things, especially things that we don't see here in the States or haven't really saw light of day over here. I found a strategy guide with a whole manga in it that nobody knew about in English speaking websites anywhere. And like I know a lot of really big people in the Zelda community, people who have like preserved manga, preserved strategy guides, people from the Zelda Dungeon team, who are like, I don't know what this is. What is this? What is this?
Wow.
And then I ended up finding like the artist on Twitter, and very, very haphazardly stumbling my way with the help of a friend translating into Japanese. Like, what is this? I don't even know what this is. Help me. So that's where my problems lie. I buy too many things, and then I have to research them, and I have to pester people all over the world about what the heck I bought.
Yeah, that's incredible. And yeah, I love seeing like alternate, game covers and things like that. It's just like to see something from the past that you have such like nostalgia for, and to see like there's other artwork that you never knew about, like other original art. It's awesome. And I in 2020, I think I did a similar thing. I I have a buddy who owns a game store in California, and he told me about this Japanese game store that would ship games directly to the US. And I think it was like at a certain point it was free shipping or something, or you could get the shipping down a little bit. So me and my buddy just did the biggest order we could possibly do to to bring that cost down. So I definitely had to get like Minish Cap, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, the Japanese versions, just because I love, even though I don't have systems that can even play them right now, unless I modded them or something, I just love the boxes. And they all came with the boxes and everything, and they're just beautiful.
Majora's Mask box is so much cooler than what we got. Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
it
for
fits
sure.
the vibe way better.
And I love the Minish Cap one too. The little, it looks like it's a candy box almost, but
Yeah.
yeah, I love that artwork so much.
It always kind of makes me wonder why we even have regional differences. Like even with European, it's interesting to see those differences and kind of question like why did you even bother? Because nowadays you really don't see that kind of variations between regions anymore.
Yeah, there is like a little bit
stuff.
like Breath of the Wild does have like the regional difference with like the European version versus I actually did a whole tier list of all like the Zelda different box variations. And it was crazy to see like so many different ones. Like I know there's that Wind Waker one that has like Ganondorf. It's kind of like the ending scene of the game with like Ganondorf and Link and Zelda. And I'm like, I've never seen this in my life, but it's so cool to see. So I did want to ask, like, how do you discover? I mean, you talked about discovering that manga in a strategy guide. But when it comes to things like discovering like the Bandai trading card set for Ocarina of Time, how do you find a lot of these things that a lot of people don't really know even exist for Zelda?
A lot of that stuff is from importing. Half the time there'll be a listing, just a random like here's a single card, and I just will bid on it, or I'll try to buy it now, depending on what kind of auction or listing it is, and then try to do research from there. It's unfortunate that there's a big Zelda community that you can reach out to. However, there's a lot of competition in that community, and I have a lot of frenemies where we jokingly will both bid on the same thing, both seriously wanting that item. And then we're like, oh, did you win that? No, did you win that? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of competition, especially when you get into the really obscure stuff. Sometimes if you want it for yourself, you kind of have to be like hush hush about it and kind of share that info after the fact. Otherwise, if you're like, hey, like, is this a real thing? Like, what is this? And then like one of your friends like snipes it out from underneath you, and then you're like, dude, thanks, come on. But there are a lot of good like people out there. So I actually started learning about a lot of the Japanese imports through Video Game Memorabilia Museum. The website is now down just because it was an older website and it was hard to kind of keep the bandwidth up. But there is still a Facebook group. It's VGMM. And then it's run by a YouTuber named Brett. His handle is NightRam56. His website used to be the video gaming mecca as far as collectibles go. And I know at one point he actually had the Guinness record for like the largest memorabilia collection at the time. I don't know if that still holds. But his stuff is typically Nintendo, though he did have other stuff. He had just catalogs of every item in a set of Gachapon, or every item in a trading card set, or every item that was released through Nintendo Power, what have you. People would submit photos, and that was one of the things that was like, oh, hey, like, I should do something like this. And then there were other people, my friend Anne, who you might have heard of, Icona Kingdom, depending on if you follow her personal or her Zelda socials. Like she had a website just on her collection, and then there was another website from another VGMM group, member. Manveri is their handle name. Their websites, they had much older personal collection websites that actually inspired me to make my own website. One, because with all the research that I was doing, it was hard to mentally categorize what I owned and what I had only researched. There's tons of items where I'm like, oh yeah, I totally have that, because somebody would ask me about it and like, can you get a more detailed photo than what's already up? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then I'd go and I'm like, where's this item? And it's not even there, because I had researched it so many times that I just mentally checked that I had it, and then I didn't. Um, so making a website helps me kind of like keep track of everything. Um, but yeah, just their websites alone kind of started that window into, hey, there's regional items that never came out here. We actually got very, very little Zelda merchandise here in the States. We really didn't see that until like the early 2000s, even kind of mid like 2010s even. We didn't get a lot of that kind of stuff here. So a lot of it is European, a lot of it is Japanese, most of it's Japanese. So their websites just even informed me that there were regional items. And then because I'm that research nut, I would be looking up whatever key terms I could to find, that rubber item. What is this rubber figure? And then I would learn about Gachapon or Keshi or Zelda card. And then I'd find all these like vintage 1998 cards. And then every time I would research one thing, I would find 3 more things that I had never heard about. And then that rabbit hole just kept getting deeper, because then I would search those 3 things and then I'd find more things that way. So that's really where it kind of came from, is just my friends' websites and the community around them that even opened up my frame of reference that there were other things out there. And then in my search to find out what those were, just kept finding more and more and more. And then like I'm still finding, even to this day, I'm still finding stuff, especially Japanese imports, people that just don't even know about over here. So I just keep digging, keep reaching out. I keep trying to very rudimentarily learn Japanese key phrases, at least, just so I can have those typed in, because it's very different searching in kanji than if you're searching in English text. So if you type in Zelda like in Bai, if you just type in Zelda, you're not going to get half the items if you type in Zelda in kanji. So those big phrases and those key changes between even just what language you're trying to research in really makes a difference as far as like what you're going to find and what you're going to learn about.
Yeah, that's amazing. To like the amount of work you put into it, I respect the heck out of it, and we all appreciate it because it's extremely valuable. And so I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, so when most people think of Zelda collecting, they mostly just think of the games. I think a lot of people in the US, when they collect Zelda, they mostly focus on the games. So as you
That
said,
kind of makes the most sense, right? Because
yeah,
that's the thing that you're interested in. You don't think about all of like the synergy items, the clothing, the
yeah,
books, the toys, all that kind of stuff.
yeah. Because when it comes to Zelda, I always think about like Zelda and Pokemon and how they just like there's very different strategies there in terms of like how they marketed the games and in marketing in general. And it's like people have nostalgia for Pokemon, not just the games, but the cards and everything because they grew up with it. Whereas Zelda, it's most kids because it's like they only had those like Ocarina of Time figures that came out. And I know there's some like old Nintendo cards with like Zelda on them and stuff, but other than that, it's the nostalgia lies in the games. But as I said, the collecting for Zelda, most people just do the game. So would you consider the community that collects just outside of the games like extremely niche, or do you think there's a sizable community that just most people don't realize how big it is?
I'd say it's pretty sizable still. It's not as pop culture-y, I think, as collecting the video games are. And I was actually just having this discussion the other day. I have a large clothing collection from Zelda stuff, going back to vintage things to modern t-shirts, things like that. And there was the argument presented to me that like a person wearing a Zelda t-shirt, like they're not like a real gamer because like, oh, you're just wearing like this like gamer t-shirt, you don't know what you're wearing kind of thing. Or like, oh, you're buying sealed graded video games that are Zelda games because you know that they're money and you don't really know the games, or you don't know the lore. You don't. And I'm not that kind of a gatekeepery kind of person. But I do think that the more obscure items, unless you're looking for them, most people outside of the community don't really know about them. And because there's so many regional different things and so many consumable items, things that used to get thrown away or things that were small, things that would get lost, they're harder to research. They're harder to find. They're not as readily accessible to the public as like one of the games would be, or even some like the current clothing lines and stuff like that. So like there is a big community that like I'm part of a lot of the big groups out there. But as far as like if I asked my mom to go Christmas shopping for me and I'm like, hey mom, I'm looking for a Zelda item, she'd go, honey, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, please just like buy it and then I'll reimburse you. Um, it's one of those things where like my partner really really tries, and he's really big into like collectibles and vintage toys and that kind of stuff, and he has a hard time still finding things. Not that he doesn't have access to, because he knows a lot of my friends now, so he can kind of like go behind my back and talk to them and like, hey, help me out here. But they're not as easy to find. I think they're getting easier thanks to like eBay and things like that. But yeah, it's one of those. If you were a comic book nerd, you're the person. Like I feel like the person that's read all the comic books since like, you know, the golden era, and you're the person, not you, but like the royal you, like the general public is like watching the Marvel movies. And sure, they're both comic book people, but one's got a very different perspective than the other. Oh yeah, it's just one of those. They're out there. The communities are out there. It just depends on where you're looking, I guess.
Yeah, it's good to know that, because I had no idea how, like, I still really don't know how many people like are out there, and it seems like you are very well entrenched in the community, so I'm glad I reached out to you.
I think I'm just one of the loudest,
because I have like so much to learn. But yeah, it feels small, like, because I've just like, you know, I've like 2020 I got back into collecting Pokemon cards, and then I went to a card shop and I saw the Twilight Princess packs, and he had them for $4, and I'm like, oh, these are really cheap. They're probably worth more than that. And but I remember like I bought one pack way long ago, like when it was still in card shops regularly, and I remember opening it and I was like, oh wow, I totally forgot about this. So then I like bought all the packs he had basically, and was like getting into it and wanted to get in collecting it. And then I saw there was like the whole 2016 set and all that. So that just, I like dove right into it. But kind of going back to what I said, it feels small when I'm looking for those box topper cards that you you could only get by
especially
opening
recently.
a box. Yeah, and I'm just looking and I'm like, I there's like a listing maybe once every 2 months for one of these cards, but clearly that's only one part of a much larger you know, set of collectibles out there. But moving on, I did want to ask you, so obviously you have quite an extensive collection. Is there a kind of white whale, like a holy grail item that you want for your collection that you haven't been able to get, either due to it being expensive or just hard to track down?
So there's a lot. There's a lot out there, especially when it comes to like lower I guess print runs of items. First Four Figures, you might be well aware of, gets official licensing rights from Nintendo to make Zelda stuff. And because they release such a limited number of products, unfortunately it's become, especially nowadays, if you don't get it when it's brand new, you're never going to get it for close to that price again. It's going to skyrocket. And there's a lot of them that I passed on back in the day because either I was a broke kid or, you know, whatever. And now it's like, oh, I wish I just bought them. I wish I didn't eat lunch that week and I just bought it, you know? So like with that big Japanese import during 2020, one of the items that I actually successfully got from that big haul was a Skull Kid from First Four. And when those originally released for retail, they were about $100. Statues, you know, yay big. You can't touch them now for like less than $1,700, $1,800.
Wow.
It's like stateside, which I hate. I really hate that they're that expensive. I understand that they're expensive because they're very fragile. They're very limited. I think there's only about 2 or 3,000 of them made. I hate the monetary mentality of collectibles.
Yeah.
And it was an item that like I never thought I was going to own just because I missed it. And I thought that was going to be it. And this listing came up in Japan and they didn't have any photos. It was just the listing. And they had a stock photo from First Four Figure from back in the day. And it was one of those, you don't know the condition, you don't know anything. Do you take the gamble? And I did. And I got very, very fortunate. There were other listings of like one of the items that I will fight for until I think the day I stop breathing. There was a life-size Twilight Princess Link statue from Animu, I think is how you pronounce the company's name. He's like 6'5". He's standing on a big rock. He's got a Master Sword and a Hylian shield, and he's just epic posed. He's massive. He's bigger than me. And I had actually won an eBay auction for him for like $800, which is insane. Usually they go for a couple thousand, and this guy didn't want to ship it. And I had at this point already traveled across the country to get another very large statue. And I was like, my crazy Zelda fanatic face will go across the country to go get this statue. So you tell me when and where, and I will meet you there. Like, I will go. And the guy backed out because I think he wanted more money. And it was just one of those, like, he refunded me, and eBay was like, nope, there's nothing that we can do about it. Like, you got a refund. And I was like, but it was right there in the palm of my hands. It's so close. And one day I'll get one. They don't come up very often on auctions, and when they do, they're usually damaged. And I might just have to resign myself to get a damaged one at this point.
Did they have one of those? And unless I'm thinking of a different statue, there was a statue, I want to say either like that or similar, and that was like in Nintendo World New York.
There's a big one right now, actually, that's a different pose. The one that's up right now, I think is him in his Skyward Sword outfit. I'm trying to remember what the buckle looks like.
Maybe it was Skyward Sword. Because this was, I want to say I was there like 2012 or 2011 or something at that time.
Well,
so
this one
it
would have
could
been a
been
newer one because the new one is from Nintendo Tokyo, and they also made like miniature versions of them, so you could like take home the same statue. So they might have had that one because the one that I'm talking about originated in Germany. That's where the company was, I guess, housed at the time. And it was released, I think, for E3, if I remember correctly. So there's a good chance that like they shipped them out because they were international. There's a bunch of them in Europe. There's a bunch of them here in the States for sure. And I think they were like a big promotional statue that was used during E3. So it might have been at World and the Nintendo Store. I've actually never had the opportunity to go visit there. I know that the one that's there now, they put up kind of in celebration of the Nintendo Tokyo store that opened up during shutdown era. And that one is him just standing kind of like straight and like just up and down, straight armed, kind of goofy looking dude. The one I really would like to get my hands on, there were a couple thousand of those made internationally. If not at least a couple hundred. And that one is just a big, massive, dumb thing. I did find one that was brand new, like still in its boxes even, like never opened before. It was on eBay, and it was boxed up in 3 giant cardboard boxes because it was just that massive. And I think he might be bigger than the one that's currently in New York and in Tokyo right now. I think he might have been a little bit.
Is that when you need like
statue?
You need like freight service or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, like so I was crazy. So I live kind of Midwest. I was ready to drive to California for this listing that I had won, and the guy backed out on me. And I'll get it one day. I'll keep fighting.
Yeah, I mean, if you're already in it for 800, it's like you might have, I would have done the same thing in your situation.
It was definitely one of those auctions that I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this for like the low bid that I put in. But because it was a pickup only, People didn't bid on it, and that's actually how I got my other statue. I don't know if you saw it on my site. I'd bring it over here, but it's much too large to put in front of the camera. I have the 2011 Nintendo Holiday Mall Tour Skyward Sword statue, which is a sword in the stone pedestal. It stands like up to here on me. It's maybe 4.5 feet tall. I forget exactly what the dimensions are.
I'll look for the image and pull it up.
Yeah, well, right
when
here.
I'll edit it in. Yeah, but I did not see that yet. But that's pretty awesome.
As of today, I think I'm aware of 6 swords still existing. I have a whole. I've literally been like.
Did you try to pull the sword out?
These? No. So. These were made for this mall tour event. And this mall tour event, they had multiple tours across the country that year, but only 10 locations in the nation had this big Skyward Sword display. And I actually found the guy that designed this event and did a little interview with him, which is also on that big listing on my site. About how he kind of put together the whole concept. There's like AstroTurf and like the statue in the corner of like the sword and the stone. And then there was a big octagon that was just surrounded with Wii's and monitors, and you could play Skyward Sword demo for that holiday season. The statue was created by an artist, and I think the girl that I got mine from said that Nintendo commissioned the artist for about $500 or $800. It was something like that per statue. And after the event was over, they were supposed to destroy the statue. And she was working it and was like, yep, I destroyed it in the back of my car. And just held it. She wasn't even a big Zelda fan. She just kind of held onto it, just knowing that it was going to be something special. And at the time when she finally thought it was kind of safe to put it up for auction, she was living in Minnesota, which is where that event was. It was... near St. Paul is where the event was held. And
was it Mall of America or
it wasn't at the Mall of America? It was north of there.
Okay.
That if you weren't in the area, it's just some nondescript mall. But when she finally listed it, because it's so massive and it's made out of resin, so it's very delicate. She was like, nope, I'm not going to ship this. I'm not going to be responsible if this breaks because like I don't know how many of these are out there. I'm not going to do this. You got to come get it. And this was like a winter auction. And, you know, me being in the Midwest, I'm not afraid of snow. So I was like, hey, this is Christmas season and I do work retail, video game retail. I can't get time off until after Christmas. If I bid on this auction, do you promise to hold it for me until I can get time off in January? And she's like, yeah. So I went on blind trust. I won my statue for $50.
Wow.
Because no one else would bid on it. People were like offering her thousands of dollars to get the statue because of like how rare it is. And she's like, nope, some crazy person from the Midwest, you know, they're going to come out here in the snow. So unless you want to come up this January, like I'm not doing it. And she held firm. I was the only person that ended up bidding on it. The starting bid was $50 and I won it at the starting bid because no one else would drive in the middle of winter to go get this thing from Minnesota. I did. Well, I didn't drive. I took the train because I am not afraid of snow, but I'm also lazy. So I took the train there. But yeah, at the time, my statue was the only one.
Did you just have a massive box on the train on the way back? Or?
So we wrapped it in a blanket and we kind of looked like we were crazy little hobos with our like raggedy blanket wrapped around it. It was just small enough to count as one of our carry-ons.
Wow.
So I actually went with my partner, and the sword comes out of the pedestal. So the sword was my carry-on, and then like one of our luggage bags with our clothes and stuff. And then he had the base as one of his carry-ons, and then like the other luggage bag that we had. So because you could have up to 2 per person. And so we each had part of the statue as our carry-on. And they were just wrapped up in like dirty blankets and stuff. And we're just like walking at one of our conjunction points, or juncture points, whatever you want to refer to it as, was Chicago to get back home. So we're like walking around the streets of Chicago because we just walked everywhere. We didn't have a lot of money at the time. And we were literally walking around the streets of Chicago with like giant items wrapped in dirty blankets and just trying to get to our next train so we could make it home. And I'm glad we did because, again, it's a very rare piece. As of right now, I think there's only 6 that of the 10 that are still known to be in full existence. And there's a whole breakdown because the artist made just extra swords as well. So there might be 20 some swords and like 10 full statues. So I have like a whole breakdown on my website about like every time like one pops up or like somebody like is, oh, I have this thing on eBay. Like, can you tell me more about it? Or they'll link it to my website and then be like, it's this item. And I'm like, why is my website on eBay? What's going on here? And people from all over will message me like, there's another sword. There's another sword. So I've been trying to keep track and kind of guessing based on where they've been found and where they've been purchased through, like which mall from across the country they came from the list of the events. Like I put way too much research just into this one statue. I think I'm probably the only person that does at this point. But that's one of my big other crazy things. And so like if I was willing to travel all the way to Minnesota, what's traveling to California? I'll keep going. I'll get my big Link statue one day.
That's incredible. And I'm glad that people didn't destroy them, like that they went against there's so many of those things that I'm so happy people thought to not get rid of them, and that people who truly appreciate them can now own them, and it's just a part of history.
I understand where Nintendo's mindset is too, as far as like, oh, it's for this thing, we don't want people reselling and scalping and whatnot. But like the historian in me and like the archaeologist almost is like, no, like it needs to be preserved. At least put it in a museum. Like it doesn't have to be privately owned. Just like don't destroy it. Like put it somewhere.
It's like you're the Indiana Jones of Zelda.
I feel like it. I feel like, and that's another reason why I do my website too. Is like if I can't physically provide the world with the museum, at least I can provide a digital museum and share as much of my research as I can with people, just so that way it's out there and it's recorded and it's not a lost item. Because like if this statue got thrown out and destroyed, who would have known about it 10 years later? Who would have known about it even 5 years later? Like I live an hour away from one of the malls that had that event. I didn't even know until I got my statue, and I got my statue years after the event was over. I had no idea. I didn't know that was even a thing. And I live so close to one that had one, and I'm very sad that I missed that one. Because like it would have been an awesome event to even go to. And it's things like that if somebody isn't out there documenting and sharing this info, there's just a lot of people who don't ever get to know about it.
Yeah. No, it's true. And it's always like a kind of like a grassroots effort from like the community to document these things. Cause I see, following like Pokemon trading cards, like I see a very similar thing to like that's kind of taken on this whole new life. But there's a lot of that same, like it started with a very small community that was just figuring out these variants with all that, and it's cool to see that same thing in Zelda that I'm only recently discovering exists. And I did want to ask you a few quick questions before as we kind of wrap things up. But first of all, what
forever? So please tell me to stop.
No, just trying to respect your time. But first of all, what is your favorite Zelda game?
Out of nostalgia, it's definitely Ocarina of Time. It was my first like love. Like it was my first favorite Zelda game. I liked the other ones. I had the other ones beforehand, but that was the game that made me fall in love. Us being a similar age, we came from an era that didn't have, YouTube to just pull up soundtracks of our favorite stuff, or even just having video game soundtracks wasn't a thing back then. And so I would literally, go to the outskirts of Gerudo Valley, and I would just stand there and I would like clean my room to the sounds of Gerudo Valley, and that would be my soundtrack for cleaning. So that was a game that I just invested so much time in, even if it was just background noise. I just loved exploring that space. So it's definitely that. I know that there's a lot of arguments against it today, as far as like, oh, there's a lot of dead space, and oh, there's blah, blah, blah. Retrospective, like that was a cutting edge game of the time, and you have to give it its credit for what it was at the time. There's so many video games today that wouldn't exist the way they are without that game. It's just such a historical and pivotal moment in video gaming history, and then also just in my love of the franchise. So it's that one. Like the rose tinted glasses will never come off.
No, it's totally understandable. It is also my favorite, although Wind Waker for a time was my favorite because that was the game I felt like I beat on my own. Like I had a lot of help with friends and stuff with Ocarina of Time, but then the 3DS version actually got me to fall in love with Ocarina of Time all over again. I just played through it, and I played through it again and again and again, and I'm like, this game never gets old. So,
Yeah, it's
but
definitely one of the titles that like I can always just go back to and just replay. It's not daunting like some other ones like the collectathons in other games like Twilight Princess, where it's like, oh god, this game goes on forever.
Yeah. That slow beginning in Twilight Princess always gets me, but once you get through it, it's a fun game. And I wanted to ask you, as a fan of watching the Zelda Dungeon marathons, and always been a fan of that website. What was it like? I saw you participated in the Zelda Dungeon marathon. So, what was your experience like participating in those?
So, funny story. I know we mentioned before the camera kind of got rolling. We're from an era, or at least I'm from an era of internet where like you didn't show your face, you didn't put your name out there. You were, if anything, just your handle. And so I had been following websites like Zelda Dungeon, Zelda Universe, Zelda Informer for it seems like forever at this point. And at the time, you didn't know the faces behind it. You just knew, maybe the online handle, you knew like their articles, things like that. And it started with the Zelda Symphony. I went to Chicago for one of the earliest Zelda Symphony performances, and I was in costume because I'm that person. And I'm just standing outside waiting for somebody, and a guy comes up and he's like, "Hey, I love your costume. Can I get a photo with you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Like, can I get a photo with you as well?" So we both like had photos taken with our phones and whatnot. And he's like, "Do you know who I am?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, no, I'm really bad with names and faces as it is. I'm really sorry." And he's like, "Well, I'm Massey's. I run Zelda Dungeon." And I just died. I've known the name. I knew the website. It was wild, like meeting somebody, especially when you had no idea like what they looked like.
Yeah.
It was wild putting it together. And so it was one of those like starstruck moments for me. I'm like, hi. And then it was just kind of that. Like I was still starstruck. It was just one of those like weird, oh my god, I can't believe I met this person kind of moments. And then because I do a lot of craft stuff, I do cosplays, I do Zelda plushies. Like I'm just all over Zelda nerd. I was making whiz robes from Zelda 1 off of a very, very specific Zelda art from a Japanese strategy guide from the Million Publishing Company. The artwork is very kind of cutesy, and so it just really lended itself to like the plushie aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a plushie, and all of a sudden I get an order on my website from him. And I'm like, guys. And it kind of started from there. So I made this plushie, and then the subsequent plushies he kept ordering. And I'm like, guys, he bought more. Oh my god, like he bought more. Zelda Dungeon. And having that moment. And then he reached out to me one day and he's like, "Hey, so we do like this big charity marathon. Do you want to come?" And I've been there now a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have this like starstruck like anxiety when I go. I usually go hide in a corner and I keep working on more plushies because I'm like, I don't people, why am I here? I feel like an imposter. And so that's kind of how it started. We ran into each other one day at the symphony, and then he started buying my plushies, and then every year since I've been coming back and releasing a plushie and giving plushies to the entire crew. So this year was Aquamentus because he was adamant and had been pestering me for an Aquamentus. So I did. I made my little beastie boy. And every year he's like, "Let's do a really like difficult plush." I'm like, can we do like a gel? Can we do a lever? Something real simple. I want easy, baby.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how we got invited. Was just
have you played any games during the marathon, or are you usually just working on the plushies?
I'm usually sweat shopping in the corner. I have 2 jobs. I have 2 full-time jobs plus a family, and so it's one of those. I'm also a terrible procrastinator, and I'm usually just working on plushies a lot of the time, just one, because anxiety, and I can kind of like scurry off in a corner and just do my thing and then pop out to say hi and then like go back to my cave kind of thing. There are a couple games that I get to jump in on. There's the Four Swords Adventure game, which is multiplayer,
Yeah.
which is always fun. My partner actually is not a Zelda fan. Not that he hates it, but he's nowhere near the
Yeah.
levels of insanity that I am. And he's only ever played a couple games. So that's one of the games that we get to play together because he has no idea what is going on. He's a big chaotic mess as far as like that game goes, and you know, picking up people and throwing them into the hole and whatnot. And so it's good content, lots of screaming, lots of good fun. And that's one of the few games that I get to play. There are other like mini games that we do that with so many people, because this year I think we had 30 some people at the event. It's hard to get that many people on camera. And a lot of them are like professional like speedrunners. So like a lot of them are like there trying to beat their records, and like that's like really important. And
it's evolved a lot because they used to play through each of the games, right? And now it's taken on this whole new life.
So like I get to do like Marble Madness from Twilight Princess with like the Wii U tablet and like scream at that and all of the little like fun games, and then I go hide in a corner and I keep sewing. So like maybe this year if I actually get plushies done ahead of time, like maybe I'll get to participate a little bit more. But normally my anxiety is like, I gotta go hide. I gotta get out of here. I'm an imposter.
But that's awesome to just be a part of that. So yeah, before I let you go, I know you had a couple pieces that you wanted to show. So please feel free and you know, let us know like the background behind these items.
Well, these are items that I haven't posted on any of my socials or on my website yet. Partially because I haven't had the time to, you know, drink the Kool-Aid and deep dive into them as much as I'd like. And I like to try to research stuff before I post about it. So one of the things I actually got from my partner for Christmas this year, it is a magazine. And before I put it up on camera, it's a little bit on the suggestive side. It's not Nintendo licensed, but the cover...
Is it safe for YouTube?
It's safe enough. Yeah. It's safe enough.
Okay. I just want to check.
Yeah. It's not too explicit there, but the cover it's so funny to me, especially because it's a Zelda image that I had to have it, and I was kind of like whining at work because we actually work at the same game store together, and I was like, this magazine came out in Europe, and I want it. So the magazine is Super Play.
Oh,
can you
wow.
see that there?
Yeah.
It's a little blurry. My camera does not want to cooperate. There we go. So it reads, we stripped Zelda 3 bare, and this was an early look at A Link to the Past. And just the suggestive art there made me chuckle, and I had to have it. And it's just like any kind of average kind of gaming magazine, similar to Nintendo Power, but obviously not licensed through Nintendo because it was an independent magazine through this company. But they did like nice little deep dives, and it was kind of cool just because it's still called Zelda 3. You know, it didn't have an official title yet. This is still very early. This is at an era where you didn't necessarily have all of the information, so companies were kind of just rolling with it and trying to just like early footage of video games now. You know, people tried to kind of start doing theories on it, tried to pick apart the commercial ads and that kind of stuff. So this was just what they would do in print form back before the internet was widely accessible. So like there would be just swaths of dialogue and text. My camera is super blurry. I'm sorry. But there would just be screenshots and just, like, look at this, like, Length of Punny, what's this about? You know, things like that. So those are always just fun, kind of going back and seeing what that snapshot in time was for people who obviously don't have the hindsight of what we know today. as far as like what the game was even called, you know, what the mechanics are. It's fun to go back and see that moment in time of like the excitement of like, oh, this is a whole brand new uncharted, you know, world that we're going to be diving into soon. Like I'm so excited about it. So that's one of the things that I brought. And then one of the other ones I bought, this is a stamper set from Nasta. And I still have to look a little bit more into the company. I am missing one piece of this, and they're all loose, but they are stampers. This was part of a series called Cartoon Creator, and you had like a little ink pad and these little stamper guys. I'm missing one of these. I think it's either Link at a profile or maybe another monster, but the characters can like move around.
Oh, wow.
And you could like stamp your own little action book, like your own little comic book with them. And there was like this ink pad here, and you would just like make your stamps. He came with a little shield and a little sword and a boomerang.
Oh, wow.
And then the other character is a Stealtho, one of the skeletons. And you could kind of just position them and, you know, make your own little comic book. So it was the Cartoon Creator series. And
wow.
it's just a really obscure piece of merchandise that I never thought I was going to own, because you just don't see them, or you see like a part or like a stamp, or like here's the Stealtho, but he's missing 2 limbs. You know, they're usually broken.
Is that from like the NES era?
This
Those
would have
came out
been roughly Zelda 2. The year on it is 89.
I was gonna say it felt kind of 80s to me.
Yeah, the year on it says 89. But the body, like how Link is on here, is closer to how he was drawn in Zelda 2.
Yeah.
This was very much at an era where the logo was still like the original like NES like first title logo. And especially early American stuff, there really wasn't a distinction between what game it came from, because at the time it was still Zelda. Like Mario was still Mario, Zelda was still Zelda. We didn't really like categorize things based on game and game art. So like even though the trademark is for 89, likely it would have been released a little bit later than that, just to encapsulate the Zelda 2 artwork, because like the Stealthos didn't look like, you know, that in Zelda 1. We had that more kind of aesthetic in Zelda 2.
Yeah.
The shield, you know, we didn't have a shield that looked like that in Zelda 1, but it was closer to Zelda 2. Just a lot of that really late 80s, early 90s merchandise that really started picking up after Zelda 2 came out. They were really trying to push it. Also, Zelda 2 was a hot commodity at the time. So there was a lot of crossover stuff, a lot of merchandise. And then it was not too long after that era, like after the early 90s, that Nintendo really wasn't making merchandise in North America. So that was kind of like the last hurrah generation until we recently got it back here in kind of like the mid 2000s, late 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool to just see these items that are like niches of the niches, like so things I've just wouldn't even have thought had existed. And
I'm that person that likes to collect like cereal boxes and empty wrappers. I have like an ice cream wrapper. Things that got thrown away, you know?
Yeah.
They're hard to get the stories behind now, especially if they're not documented. So I make it my personal goal to go out and preserve them.
Yeah, and I love that, and I'm glad that some of those items were able to survive, because it's so cool, and it's the type of stuff I love. And you said you're the type of person that, you know, will go through legal documents to find out about a Zelda pencil. I may not be that person, but I am definitely the person to watch a 3-hour video about someone going into the legal documents
really
to learn about a Zelda
video on it, because that it's on my socials. It's the Applause snow globe pencil, also from the same era, late 80s, early 90s. And it's just a little snow globe Link on top of a pencil. And the history behind Applause, there's death, like a whole family just gone, fighting between 2 brothers and rival companies, a troll's wedding, like a wedding all decked out in troll dolls. Like, it got wild. And the
Wow.
rabbit hole just kept getting deeper the more I dug into it. And that's the kind of stuff that you just never think about behind the
Wow.
company, behind the item. You don't know what's really happening behind the scenes until you take the wrong pill down the matrix tube and go
Yeah.
wild.
Well, that sounds like a video that needs to be made. But
One day
thank you.
if I
Yeah.
get some free time, I need
Thank
to do it at
you.
some point.
Thank you so much for joining me. And just before you go, feel free to shout out where people can find you, and all your, your websites or socials.
Yeah. So I'm linked to Little Triforce. It's dumb spelling. I don't know. It was early 2000s when I came up with it and it stuck. But you can find my collection at thelegendofcollections.com. That's going to be the big one. I tried to post at Instagram and Twitter and Facebook through my Links to the Triforce handle to record stuff because I'm terrible at updating my website. But yeah, those are the places. And if you're into it and you want to learn more about like collecting stuff as far as like video game merch, I definitely recommend checking out Video Game Memorabilia Museum, run through my buddy's Facebook group. It's just a really great community of just a bunch of collectors across like the Nintendo like spectrum.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I appreciate it once again.
Yeah, thank you.